Okay, hello everyone and welcome to Teacher Webinar 4 on Effective Questioning. This is part of the webinar series on experiential learning, preparing young people for success after school. Today's webinar is brought to you by Teach a Man to Fish. We are an educational charity based in the United Kingdom whose mission is to empower young people with the skills that they need to succeed in school, work, and life. Webinar 1 was on the growth mindset, and webinar 2 was all about supporting young people to learn from mistakes. And webinar 3 was on supporting students to become better problem solvers. If you didn't attend those first 3 webinars, don't worry. The links are on the slide at the end of this presentation, and I will be sharing the slides with you by email after today's session. Before we start, I would just like to share some ground rules for today's webinar. You'll notice that you're all on mute at the moment. That's because we have about 120 people in the webinar today. So we can't all be speaking at the same time, but don't worry, there will be plenty of opportunities to interact with other participants and share your thoughts on today's topic. At regular points in the webinar, I will be asking questions which you can answer either via the text box or the polls which will appear on your screen. I'll also invite some of you to turn on your audio and your video, and you can talk to the rest of the group. If at any point you have a question for me, please put it in the Q&A section rather than the messages section. That way I'll be sure to see it and answer it for you. Just so you know, this webinar is also being streamed on Facebook. So hello to those of you that are watching on Facebook. If you are, you're not actually here with us in the Zoom room, so I won't see your comments, but my colleague Susanna is over on the Facebook page and she'll kindly be answering your queries over there. Okay, so that was the ground rules for today. Now a little bit about me. Some of you may know me already, especially if you've attended the previous webinars. My name is India and I work on our wonderful program, the School Enterprise Challenge, run by us here at Teach a Man to Fish. I won't tell you too much about it at the moment because we'll go into that a little bit later on. Now, before we get started, it would be really nice if those of you that haven't already could introduce yourselves very quickly. As I mentioned, there's quite a lot of us, so I'm afraid we won't have time to do personal introductions, but if you could just write your name and which country you're from in the chat box, that would be great. And then we'll know who's in the room with us here today. So I can see that we've got plenty of teachers from India, we have teachers from South Africa, Nepal, Albania. A very warm welcome to you all. It's great to have such an international community of teachers joining us today. Okay, so time to get started. First, we'll take a look at what we're going to be covering today. So the duration of today's webinar is approximately 1 hour. I'll certainly try to keep it under 1 hour, but it might just depend on how chatty you are. And in the next hour, we're going to be looking at the Bring on the Learning Revolution video, a brief overview of the education system then and now, a recap on the learning journey, which we talked about in the earlier webinars, and then we'll look at the role of teachers as facilitators in experiential education. Then we will take a quick look at School Enterprise Challenge as an experiential learning program. After that, I will be sharing with you 2 practical tools which are to do with the power of effective questioning. And one of those tools is for you as teachers. And then we have another tool to share with you, which is for the learners themselves. And finally, I will be sharing with you an experiential learning activity. At the end of the webinar, I will also share with you all a link to a survey. When you complete the survey after the webinar, you will be emailed a certificate of attendance. And as I mentioned earlier, I will also share these presentation slides and a list of useful resources with you by email after today's webinar. So there's no need to take notes of what's on the screen if you don't want to. Okay, I hope that sounds good to you all. Now it is time to get started. So in the description for this webinar, I shared a link to a video called Bring on the Learning Revolution by a speaker called Sir Ken Robinson, who's quite a well-known education advisor. And I would like to briefly discuss the video together. So please could you let me know if you had a chance to watch the video, and don't worry if you didn't, but if you did watch the video, and you would like to come forward to tell the rest of the group about what you took away from it, what it was about, then please do write a message in the chat box and I will invite one or two of you to share your thoughts, what you took away from the video. I'll just give you a few seconds to do that now. Okay, it looks like today not many of you had a chance to watch the video, but don't worry, because I can do a quick recap for you now for those of you that didn't have a chance to watch it. So in the video, Sir Ken Robinson talks about how human resources are like natural resources. They're often buried deep and you have to go looking for them. You have to create the circumstances where they show themselves. And you might imagine that education would be the way that that happens, but too often it's not. And Sir Ken Robinson argues that we need a revolution in education. He uses an analogy about fast food. He says there are two types of quality assurance in catering. There's fast food, where everything is standardized, and there's Michelin restaurants, which is completely the opposite, where everything is customized to local circumstances. And we've built our education systems on the model of fast food, of conformity. However, human talent is incredibly diverse and individuals have very different aptitudes. So Sir Ken Robinson argues that we need to go from an industrial model of education based on linearity, conformity, and batching people to one based on principles of agriculture. So recognizing that human flourishing is not a mechanical process, it's an organic process. And we need to create the conditions under which humans will begin to flourish. Now, before we look at some practical ways of how you as a teacher can create these conditions to empower your students to lead their own learning, I just wanted to take a quick moment to talk about the traditional education system and the traditional role of teachers as disseminators of information. Now, the school system that we know today has its roots in industrialization around 200 years ago during the time of the Industrial Revolution. Back then, students were being prepared to follow instructions and work in factories. They needed to be compliant and follow the rules. So students would sit in rows, they would memorize facts and write standardized tests. And teachers were seen as knowing all and depositing this information into the students. Now today, the world has moved beyond this era of industrialization, where people worked in factories, to an era where technology has automated many jobs. And to thrive in this new world, students need to be critical thinkers. They need to be problem solvers and leaders. But unfortunately, in many schools, in many countries, the education system hasn't evolved at the same pace. So just take a look at the contrast in these photos on screen. First of all, there's a telephone from the 1920s and the modern day iPhone. Then we have a car from 100 years ago compared to one today. And finally, a classroom, then and now. And only in the photo of the classroom has very little changed. Now, that's not to say that all classrooms around the world, including the ones where you teach, necessarily look like that now photo on screen. But it is true that in many schools, students still sit in neat rows, listening to their teacher lecture just long enough to memorize what they need to recall for the standardized test. And these exams test their knowledge, but not their critical thinking or problem-solving skills, all the 21st century skills which are so highly sought after by employers. So what we're going to do today is look at some of the ways that we can break the conventional role of students and teacher and build a more active social learning environment, which relieves some pressure from teachers as the all-knowing experts and instead cultivates an environment which unlocks students' potential. And this is possible through an experiential approach to education, the belief that knowledge is best gained through experience and reflection on that experience. So in our previous webinars, we looked at the learning journey, which is a diagram which we created here at Teach Learn to Fish. We saw that learning is a messy process. Learning involves trying, failing, trying again, struggling, relearning a skill, encountering an obstacle, overcoming it before finally succeeding, and so on. And if you weren't able to attend that webinar where we talked about the learning journey in a bit more detail, don't worry, because the full recordings are available on our YouTube channel, and I've included the links at the end of this presentation. So to look at the learning cycle another way, we can see in this diagram on the left that learning happens when, first of all, we experience something, we act deliberately, or something unplanned happens to us. Second of all, we take time to explore our reactions and responses to what we experience. Thirdly, we understand and reflect on what happened and draw conclusions from it. And finally, we adapt or modify our future decisions and behaviours as a result of this learning process, the learning cycle. Now, the third stage of reflection, understanding and drawing conclusions is really key, because without that stage, we may jump to conclusions, or we may understand but fail to apply that learning in the future. If you want some useful tools which you can use to help students reflect on their learning and develop their metacognitive skills and growth mindset, make sure to check out the recording of webinar 1 on YouTube. And I will also be sharing more practical tools to help students reflect on their own learning later in this webinar. But before we move on to that, let's just take a quick look at what a teacher's role is in experiential learning. So what does it look like if we flip the traditional roles of teacher and student which I spoke about earlier, on their head? Well, in a more learner-led environment, the teacher takes on the role of facilitator. According to Edna Ruth's book, Life Skills, a resource book for facilitators, facilitation is not telling, not lecturing, not directing. Facilitation is providing the resources and structures for people to explore, learn, and develop. So what does that look like in practice? Well, a good facilitator will play lots of different roles at once. You could think of them as an animator, a networker, an enabler, a broker, a mediator, a catalyst, or a coach. And we'll take a look now at a couple of those roles in more detail. A good facilitator acts as a catalyst for discussion. They make possible the transformation of input, so ideas and opinions, to the desired outcome, refined ideas, decisions, strategies, and so on, without being an active part of the conversation themselves. A good facilitator also acts as a coach. So they help their students to form a constructive way of working together, identifying their needs and wishes and supporting them to reach the outcome that they would jointly like to achieve. And as you can see, a facilitator should guide the group to find their own solutions without being told or offered solutions. It's really important with experiential learning activities that teachers avoid dictating what the learners should do or how they should do it, not only so that the learners develop their problem solving and communication skills as they find a path forward for themselves, but also so that students feel that they have ownership over the outcomes and decisions they reach. Now, in a moment, I'm going to introduce you to a tool which you can use to help you embrace the role of teacher as facilitator and empower your students to take the lead. But just before I do that, I would like to launch a quick poll and find out, have you ever taken part in the School Enterprise Challenge before? So you should see a poll appear on your screen now if you're in the Zoom room, and you can vote either yes or no. I'll just give you a few moments to vote now. Okay, the votes are coming in. We've got about 2/3 of you have voted so far. The majority of you haven't taken part in the School Enterprise Challenge. I'll just give it a few more seconds for the rest of you to cast your vote. Okay, we will end it there. So about 2/3 of you have never taken part in the School Enterprise Challenge before. So for those of you that don't know, the School Enterprise Challenge is a free educational program where we support participants who are students and teachers from all over the world to plan, set up, and run their very own real business. School teams come up with exciting and innovative business ideas. They write their own business plan and go on to actually launch their business, selling their product or service to real people and earning real money. And through this experiential learning approach, students develop the skills that will make them successful in life and employment. Skills such as their ability to relate to others, to work as part of a team, to communicate effectively, to problem solve, to innovate, and to influence. And The reason I brought that up now is because in a moment, I'm going to explain a tool which will help you to create the right environment in which to empower your learners. And we'll be talking about it in the context of a school business, such as one that you would plan and set up through the School Enterprise Challenge. But don't worry if you haven't taken part before, because this tool that I'm going to be sharing can also be applied to lots of other experiences or situations and used in all sorts of subjects. So as a teacher supporting a team of students to take part in the School Enterprise Challenge, you may feel that it's your responsibility to come up with a good business idea, to tell the students exactly how to write their business plan, and to solve any problems that they might encounter along the way. But in fact, the opposite is true. And we ask you to think of yourself instead as a non-executive director of the school business, as a guide and a mentor, not the general manager or the driver. Of course, it's inevitable that learners will face challenges and they will come to you for guidance, answers, and advice. But this is a great opportunity to put the ball back into their court and ask your learners questions in a way that will help them to come up with their own answers. So, here are some questions which you can use to help guide your students and facilitate their learning. These are really helpful prompt questions to have up your sleeve if you haven't facilitated experiential learning very much before. And we've grouped these questions into different themes. So first of all, take a look at the column on the left on your screen. These are questions to help students get unstuck, or in other words, how to overcome a complex problem which is stopping them from moving forward. And we've got 3 effective questions to share with you which you can use in this situation to help students get unstuck. So the first question is, what's the problem in a nutshell? What's the problem in one sentence? And what's the problem in one word? Asking students this sequence of 3 questions will help them to break down the stumbling block and really get to the heart of the issue. We find that it's useful in lots of different situations. So whether your students are, say, facing a design challenge with their product, or they're in disagreement about what strategy their business should take, these questions will really help them to get to the heart of what it is that's stopping them from moving forward. Another way of asking this is simply, what's getting in your way? What could you do about that? And crucially, what's stopping you from doing that now? Finally, another good way to help students to get unstuck is to say, think of someone you admire. What would they do in your position? It can really help students to realize that they're not the first or the only people to face a problem, and they can look to successful people or businesses that they know for inspiration, like, for example, how to market their school business or how to raise the startup capital that they need to get it off the ground. Okay, so that's the first set of questions which you can have up your sleeve to help students to get unstuck. Now we're going to move on to look at the second column, which is questions to help deepen students' learning. These questions are great for getting students to explore a situation in more depth, making sure that you as the teacher remain neutral and that you give your learners the opportunity to draw their own conclusions. So the first question is, what proof exists that? And this is a useful question to help students to challenge their assumptions. So for example, they might be convinced that there's a huge demand for their product or service without having carried out any market research. So asking this question, what proof exists that there's a huge demand for your product or service, will guide students to make sure that they have enough evidence to back up their claims. Or if not, how they can plan the research that they need to do if they don't have that evidence already. Secondly, what are the implications of is a nice one to get students to think about the bigger picture and to connect the dots between the consequences of an action in a particular part of the business or activity and the rest of it. Like, for example, if they start to sell their product before they've got the record-keeping systems in place to keep track of how much money they're making and selling, you could ask your students, what would be the implications of starting to sell your product or service before you've got those record-keeping systems in place, to get them to think through the consequences. Last of all, I'm going to share just one final question which you can ask your students to help them reflect at the end of an experiential learning activity. So to explore their reaction and response to what they experienced. And the question is, what was your most interesting discovery about this experience? And what might you want to learn more about because of this? So I've included this because we've spent quite a lot of time today and in previous webinars looking at questions and responses to address challenges and solutions. So on the other hand, this is a nice question for students to reflect on what they enjoyed, what they found interesting, and what they're curious to learn more about. We are not going to take a look today at any other questions which you as a teacher can ask your learners to help them reflect, because next I actually want to introduce you to a tool which you can give to your learners so that they can ask themselves questions and lead the reflection process on their own. So I'm going to go through that with you now, and then after that there'll be an opportunity for you to comment and feedback on these two tools and share your thoughts with the rest of the participants. Okay, so the next tool is called What, So What, Now What? And it's a series of questions which will guide students through the process of reflection. You could print these questions on a worksheet for your learners to answer individually, or get them to write them out in their books, or you could facilitate a class discussion using these same questions. So the first set of questions is about the what. What exactly happened? What was I doing? What was my role in the situation? What actions did I take? And what were others doing? So these questions are to get students to describe the situation and get clear on the facts of what happened in an objective way. Next, learners will ask themselves, so what? Why is this important? What does it tell me? What does it teach me? What does it imply? And the prompt questions to get students to answer the so what is, so what did I need to know to help me deal with this situation? And what else could I have done? And the final phase of reflection is, now what? These are the questions which will lead towards action. So now what do I do to make things better? Now what will I do? Now, what might be the consequences of this alternative action? Or in other words, of doing it in a different way next time. And this is where it all comes together and learners convert what they have learned from this experience into actions which they can take forward into other situations. And so the learning cycle continues. And the beauty of these 3 sets of questions is that they can be used to reflect on any situation or event. So if you have a school business, you could get your learners to ask themselves these questions after, for example, a sales event or a fundraising event or a team meeting. And these questions can be used both for reflecting on situations which didn't go very well, so to help students to understand what went wrong, why it didn't go so well, and to learn from their mistakes, as well as for situations which did actually go really well, to help students identify the key success factors so that they can replicate them next time. And finally, I just wanted to share another handy tool which builds on the now what phase of reflection. So another nice way of guiding students, especially younger students, to think about how they would approach a situation differently next time based on what they've learned this time is with a traffic light system. So you can get students to work in groups and write on 3 big pieces of paper: red for the things that they're going to stop doing, orange for the things that they're going to continue doing, and green for the new things or strategies that they're going to start doing. Okay, so there you have it. I've shared a set of questions which you as teachers can use as facilitators to help students get unstuck, to deepen their learning and to reflect, as well as the what, so what, now what template, which learners can use to guide their own reflection on an experience. And now we've just got a couple of minutes. I'd love to invite some of you to share your opinions. And I would be interested to know, as a teacher facilitating learners in a school business, if you've ever used questioning techniques like this before, if you think that you would use these questioning tools which I've introduced you to today with your learners, please let me know, share your comments and opinions in the chat box, and then I think we've got time for 1 or 2 of you to come off mute and share your thoughts with the rest of the group. I will just give you a couple more minutes. If anyone has any comments or feedback, if you think that these tools would work well with your learners, please do share your comments in the chat box. Kali Vani says that you'll use the traffic signal to engage your learners. Sizakide says, yes, I will try. So Ndisiwe says that you've never used this kind of questioning, but you're going to now use these questions to facilitate your learners as an advanced teacher, which is great to hear. Savita, you've got an interesting comment that the questioning technique that I've suggested today relates to open-ended questioning. I'd love to bring you off mute so you can share a little bit more about what you think about these tools and explain that point a bit more. So I'm just going to promote you to panelist. and then you will be able to unmute yourself so you can talk to the rest of the group.
Hello, Ms. Jenkel. Actually, I just wanted to share that all these open-ended questioning techniques should be used within the students during the school enterprise challenge also, as I have been the part of it last year. And with the students, those who are growing up like year 7, 8, 9, or in the primary sections also, so that they can create their own open-ended questioning, they can create their own way of thinking to solve the problem. And by the time they reach to the level of the business at the school level, they can be more confident in solving their problems under the guidance of a facilitator or a teacher.
Yeah, absolutely right. Thank you so much, Savita, for sharing. And you're quite right that the questions that I've shared here today are just a few ideas to get you started. But as you say, you can even get the students to come up with their own reflection questions to build on the ones that I've shared today to guide the reflection.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Savita. Okay, so finally, I would just like to share with you an experiential learning activity. And this activity works quite well for students of all ages, and you can do it at any time. For example, at the beginning of the school year, with a new class, or with a new school business team, or even with students that already have experience of working well together. And I'm going to be looking at the learning objectives of this activity, how long it takes, and what equipment you'll need. So this activity is called the Tallest Tower. And you might have heard of similar team building games before, which are to do with building towers, but this one's a little bit different. This activity is great for building teamwork and problem-solving skills, as well as the ability to reflect, which we know is so important to the development of the growth mindset, as we've talked about in previous webinars. The activity takes about half an hour. It's made up of 3 rounds of 10 minutes each, including time for reflection. And in terms of the equipment you'll need, you will need something to time with, so a watch or a clock or your phone, and some objects which can be stacked or stuck together. This activity was designed with Lego in mind, but if you don't have Lego, don't worry. You can improvise with lots of other materials like books, pencils, coins, matchsticks. And it's also a good idea to have some string or sticky tape or blue tack to stick the objects together if you're not working with Lego. Okay, so as I mentioned, this activity is divided into 3 rounds, and I'm going to take you through the instructions for each of the 3 rounds, and then I'll do a recap slide so you can see how the 3 rounds differ, and then we can talk about it all together. So for the first round of this activity, you'll explain to your students that the challenge is for them to build the tallest tower that they can in 3 minutes. And they need to build one tower, but they're not allowed to communicate with each other. After the 3 minutes, debrief with your students by asking the following reflection questions. First of all, what was it like building the tower without being able to communicate? Second of all, what was it like building the tower while working solo? So although your students are going to be building just one tower, remember they're not allowed to communicate. So effectively it will feel like they're working alone. And the third reflection question is, if you could do it again, what would you do differently? Okay, so that's the first round. Then for the second round, you're going to split the group into equal sized teams and split the materials equally between the teams. It's up to you how big or small the teams are. It doesn't really matter, but I would recommend around 5 to 10 students per team if you're working with quite a big group. And this time, explain that each team has to work together to build the tallest tower that they can in 3 minutes. And this time, the students are allowed to communicate with other members of their team. Then, after the 3 minutes, debrief with your students by asking the following reflection questions. What was it like being able to build the tower while being able to communicate freely? What was it like while building the tower while working on a small team? Did anyone step up to be the leader of your team? If so, how did it work out for that person who stepped up and for the rest of the group? And finally, if you could do it again, what would you do differently? Then, for the third and final round, you are going to bring all the students back together into one big team and explain that this time they have to, again, work together to build the tallest tower that they can in 3 minutes, but they are allowed to communicate with each other this time. So they're going to be all together, one big team, one tower, and they are allowed to communicate. After the 3 minutes, you'll do a final round of debrief with your students by asking them the following reflection questions. What was it like building the tower while being able to communicate freely? What was it like building the tower while working on a larger team? Did anyone step up to be the leader of the whole team? If so, how did it work out for them? And how did it work out for the rest of the group? And finally, if you could do it again, what would you do differently? And that is it. Okay, I know I went through that fairly quickly, so just to recap on the instructions for the 3 rounds, so you can see what the differences are. In round 1, everybody is working individually to build one tower together, and they're not allowed to communicate. Then in the second round, they work in small teams, building one tower per team. So each team works together to build their own tower, and this time they are allowed to communicate. And in the third round, everyone comes together as one big team, communicating and working together to build the biggest tower that they can. We find that this exercise is really useful for enhancing teamwork and communication skills. Generally, participants figure out a way to communicate effectively as the time goes on, whether that's verbally or not. They start to delegate tasks to other team members, and in the final round, they hopefully unite to reach a common outcome. So it allows students to tap into their creativity and to play on each other's strengths. And the thing is, it really doesn't matter if the towers topple over or if the students figure out how to build a really tall tower in the 3 minutes or they don't. The most important thing here is that the reflection questions are woven throughout this activity. So students have plenty of time to think about what stood out to them about each round, why that matters, so why they think it went well or less well, and what they learn from the activity, which impacts on how they would do it differently next time, or how they might apply those learnings in a different situation. So I would love to know if you would consider doing the tallest tower activity and reflection questions with your students, and for some of you to share your thoughts about this activity. I can see that some of you have already commented. Shalini, Richa, Mamta have commented to say that it's a wonderful activity, interesting, definitely going to try using it. If you would like to come forward to share your thoughts with the rest of the group, please let me know in the comments section, and then I will invite one of you to come off mute so you can let me know what you think. Alicia says that it can be a great icebreaker activity. Absolutely, great comment. Richard, you've left a lovely comment saying you think it's a great activity to promote teamwork and collaboration among learners, and that you'll try it with your kids once school resumes. That's great to hear. Mamta comments that it's a very useful activity for enhancing different skills in the children, absolutely, and playing to their different strengths. Savita says that she's done a similar sort of activity when you participated in the bronze level of the School Enterprise Challenge. Thabisa, you've left an interesting comment about how you will use it for your lesson on problem solving and creativity. It would be great to hear a little bit more about that. So I'm going to promote you to panelists now, so you can tell us a little bit more about why you think this activity could be a good one to use with your students. Hello, Thabisa. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thank you. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Actually, there's a topic that was coming up, like that. The next topic that we're teaching is problem solving and creative thinking, and so definitely I will use it, and it's a very interesting one, and it will enhance learners to use their mind and to make sure that they really capture the lesson, and that they do capture the topic as well so easily.
Great. So you think that the way it's broken down into the 3 similar rounds, which are slightly different, but with the reflection questions, will be really effective then?
Yes, yes.
Great. Thank you so much, Thabisa, for sharing your thoughts.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Okay, lots more lovely comments in the chat box. Somebody said, every child gets an opportunity to try it out and no one will be left behind by the time you get to the 3rd round. I love that. And that it will help the students to reflect on the work, and also to increase their coordination among students and the sense of responsibility and teamwork. So absolutely, it's great to start if you've got a new group of students that aren't so familiar working together before they start taking part in a program such as the School Enterprise Challenge. Okay, I'm afraid that is all that we have time for today, but I have included in the presentation slides some useful links to articles and books where you can read more about the learning cycle, the role of teachers as facilitators, and discover some more experiential learning activities. I was thinking you might be particularly interested in the article Active Learning is Better Learning by Chris Watkins, because in the article, Chris includes suggestions on how you can incorporate the cycle of active learning in different subjects such as English, maths, science, drama, history. So although we didn't have time today to go into that in too much detail, make sure to check out that article and you can see how what we've talked about today relates to the different subjects that you teach and how you can apply it in your own subjects. Make sure to also join us for webinar number 5 on appreciative inquiry, which is taking place this Thursday, the 21st of May at 3 p.m. in the UK. And again on Tuesday, the 26th of May at 12 p.m. UK time. And remember, if you're not already taking part in the School Enterprise Challenge, registrations are still open. It's not too late to sign up this year. So you can find out everything that you need to know and register for free via our website, www.schoolenterprisechallenge.org. Finally, as promised, you can get your attendance certificate by filling in this very short survey, which is on screen. And I will also post the link to the survey in the chat box now and share it with you by email along with the slides after today's webinar. Your feedback is really, really important to help us develop future webinars which are of interest and useful to you. So please do take a moment to fill in the short survey and you will then receive an email with your certificate attached. I really hope that you enjoyed today's webinar and found it useful. Make sure to stay connected with us on social media to find out about even more webinars that we'll be running for you over the next few weeks. Thank you so much everyone for joining us in today's webinar, and goodbye.